Welcome. Please take your seats and silence your cell phones. Our program is about to begin.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for coming to Story Studio. We are so excited to have all of you here. My name is Lindsay Cuyava and I am from the CGI team, and it is my honor to introduce you to your host, who the New York Times called Hollywood's advisor on climate change. She also is the president and CEO of Good Energy, which is a nonprofit that works with film writers and screenwriters to write climate narratives. And she's just an overall incredible human being. So thrilled to introduce you to Anna Jane Joyner.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay, for those kind words, and to everyone at the Clinton Global Initiative for having me here today, and all of us to have these incredible conversations, and in particular for highlighting the importance of storytelling. If I had a patron saint, it would be Enheduanna, who is the first known author in all of human history. Most of you probably didn't know that because women did not write the history books, but it's true, you can look it up. She was the daughter of a Mesopotamian emperor, and she crafted an elaborate narrative in which she became the embodiment of her people's moon goddess, a figure whose worship bound the empire together. The stories she told, brought to life through breathtaking pageantry and poetry, were the start of a mythology that reverberates throughout human history. She isn't really a saint, but regardless, my father certainly wouldn't approve of me praying to her. He is an evangelical megachurch pastor, also a climate denier, but that's a different story. He doesn't believe in praying to saints, and certainly not priestesses, but he is under her power too, wielding stories to create his religious empire, to give himself and his followers meaning and purpose, to direct his flock and shape this country. Scripture and script come from the same root, after all, the Latin word scribere, to write. Because of my religious upbringing, I realized early on the power of stories to change our worlds. My father's congregation was shaped by the words he's preached. The only other stories that I've seen have that kind of power are on screen, which is why Good Energy works with screenwriters on climate-related themes in television and film. But almost all of them aren't talking about one of the biggest stories of our time, the climate crisis. Why aren't we talking about it in the shows and films that we love? We need to talk about it in our stories so that we can talk about it in real life. We need to explore what it means to be human in the era of climate emergency. We need to envision some other ending than just the apocalypse. We don't need one hero or savior, we need a billion saviors. We need all of us doing whatever the hell we can. No one story will save us any more than one savior will. There are no silver bullets when it comes to the climate crisis, or any of the critical, complicated issues that we're here to talk about today. But if we all try, if we all tell the stories that we want to see in the world, those stories can help save it. In this segment, we'll hear from two storytellers whose entire work empowers the next generation to unlock the potential through children's literature and education. Please welcome to the stage Dr. MAUNG and Kyle ZIMMER.
Fundoji, Ju, Share Kahan, Chibaile, Ayon Marao. Greetings to everyone. My name is MAUNG. I am an indigenous person from the Chittagong Hill Tracts of Bangladesh. I share greeting with you in 5 indigenous languages. And this place is a home of 14 indigenous communities with distinct languages and cultures. One of my earliest memories growing up was when my mom used to set me on her lap and introduce me to indigenous alphabets. I fell in love with learning. And so when she told me that I would go to school, I was very excited. In one cold January morning, she took me to the mountain path and to a school. So when the bell rang, we sat in the class, and the teacher started speaking. I could not understand a word because he was speaking in Bangla. And after a while, he called my name. I stood up, and I could not say anything. So he gestured me to come forward and open my palm. And when I opened my palm, a cane came down. He gestured for the left palm, which I did, and cane came down. 2 more times like this. That day, I went home crying all the way, and I told my mom, I don't want to go to school anymore. She said, no, you have to go to school. So the following morning, when she prepared breakfast, asked me to eat, I could not. And she told me later, she observed from a distance that my head was down and tears are falling drop by drop on the food. She took pity on me, and she says, you don't have to go to school today. I didn't go to school that day, next day, next week, next month, or next year. I dropped out on the first day of the first grade. My mom homeschooled me for the next 3 years. And during those times, whenever she said we would go to visit our grandmas, I was very happy because our grandma tell me many stories. And my mom asked me to write it down. Fast forward many years, I had the opportunity to come to a magical place called Hawaii. And a few years later, I went to Harvard. Education has been passport to my life. A few years later, when I went back home to see my ailing mother, it was sad to see many indigenous children still drop out from school. And I met a little boy, Ongsi, 7 years old, shy, aloof, and alone. I don't know what you do when you're 7 years old, maybe coloring picture books in a classroom or playing house in your backyard. For Ongsi, instead of carrying books, he carried bricks. Instead of playing house, he cleans house for 35 cents a day. I thought this is injustice. I had a second chance in life, and he deserves one too. So I work with the communities. We build a school for children like Ongsi. And then we started an oral story project. Our children interview their grandmothers and village elders and come and share their stories in the classroom. And sometimes with impromptu applause and delight of their classmates. And then we take those stories and we publish beautifully illustrated, multilingual, multicultural children's books. And as an educator, we design education programs for them. And over the last few years, we realized that the children's books foster a love of learning. So with our limited capacities, we publish over 24,000 books and distributed to children who never had a children's book in their whole life. And later, we have collected 300 unique stories, and we plan to publish and distribute 300,000 children's books in the next few years. Now, you may not have atrocities or experiences like Ongsi, but we all know how it feels like sometimes powerless, or sometimes the odds are stacked against us. Whether you are fighting for climate, or whether you are fighting for gender equity, or you are fighting for LGBTQ right. In those darkest hours, someone, somewhere, opens your eyes and gives glimpses of hope. Education for these indigenous children open up their eyes and gives them hope. If you believe, as I do, a child doesn't have to grow up in the same darkness she or he was born, and it is better to light a candle than curse the darkness, I urge you to join me and us to create more educational opportunities for indigenous children. In the CGI, we met here our collective goal. If it is to help those who are inflicted by injustice and give hope to those people and the places where there is little to no hope, let's be true to this cause. ALZAIN wants to be a teacher someday, and we can send a message of hope that he is not alone. Children like him or her are not alone. They matter, their communities matter, their stories matter, and we believe in them, and we support them. And ALZAIN can be indeed a teacher and support his communities. Thank you to everyone at CGI, and thank you to all of you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kyle Zimmer. I'm president, CEO, and co-founder of an organization called First Book. 30 years ago, I was an attorney in Washington, D.C., and my hometown was going through some tough times. The crack epidemic had hit. Violence was on the increase. So I started tutoring and reading to kids at a local soup kitchen. It changed my life. I began to understand how scarce books are in the lives of kids in poverty. In fact, there's one study about a Washington, D.C. neighborhood that showed that there was one book for every 300 kids, one book. And that reality caused me to sit down with two friends of mine and sharpen our pencils and start First Book. It's a nonprofit social enterprise, and what we did was we really focused on listening to teachers. That's the power. We built the largest online community of educators in the lives of kids in poverty in North America. We currently have over 575,000 members in that community, and it's growing every month. When we listened to this community, we began building three major initiatives to serve them. One is called First Book Research and Insights. First Book R&I is our research arm, and we use it to aggregate and elevate the voice of our educator community to address a wide range of critical and important issues in educational equity. The second initiative is called the First Book Accelerator. And the accelerator expedites the contact between our community and great thought leaders that are addressing pivotal issues. Issues like mental health for kids, issues like how to talk about race and culture in our classrooms, especially these days. The third initiative is called the First Book Marketplace. The Marketplace is our nonprofit e-commerce site where we provide a huge array of free and low-cost books, e-books, and educational resources. We really focus on elevating diverse content in the books and resources we provide because we know deeply how important that is. To give you a sense of size, we provide we've provided about 225 million books through this platform, and it's growing every single year. Now, all of that is great, but the truth is that this sector in this country, we are not getting it done for our kids. It's not happening. In 2022, there was a study that showed that Black, Latino, and Native kids in the 4th grade are 80% of these kids, 80%, are not reading at grade level. It's an astounding crisis. It's a 4 or 5 alarm fire, and it calls for sweeping collaboration across all sectors to address this crisis. So what I'm delighted to be here to share with you today is a new organization. It's called the Diverse Books for All Coalition. It was founded by First Book, but it is led and run by the more than 40 organizations that have joined forces. They're here at CGI, and they're announcing a 3-part commitment to action. Number 1 is to combine their economic strength, their market power, to purchase and distribute over 600,000 beautiful, new, diverse books into the hands of the kids they serve nationwide. Secondly, they are working together to unify and heighten the national discussion around the importance of diverse books in the hands of kids. And third, they're working with organizations that are specifically focused on parents and caregivers so that they can create resources to enable parents and caregivers to select and use the very best diverse books for their own kids and to advocate for those books in their communities for programs, libraries, classrooms. It's an important new initiative because it shows the power of collaboration in the sector. This is what our future hangs on. Now, to support the coalition, First Book's Research and Insight arm today is releasing a study, and it's a nationwide pilot study of great importance, focusing on the impact of infusing the best diverse books into classrooms across the United States. What we did was we identified over 450 classrooms, and we infused those classroom libraries with the very best, brightest, diverse books. And then we watched what happened over 6 months. And what we saw was extraordinary. The number of collective hours kids read in those classrooms jumped up by 4 hours a week, and their reading scores jumped up as well. So please check out the study at firstbook.org. It's an important step. Stories inspire all of us. That's why we are all here. But we have to turn that inspiration into action, and we have to do it fast. Thank you.
It's such an honor to be speaking with both of you. Thank you so much for your incredible work. My first question is for both of you. You know, we're here today, and we're learning about all kinds from fascinating people, policy experts, politicians, just across the gamut, scientists. Why did you guys choose stories? Like, why, of all of the possible things that you could be working on, why stories? Why is the power of story and storytelling what draws you?
Please.
I think stories have been with human as early as human civilization. And stories plays a very important role in indigenous communities and also many communities around the world. Stories teach our children not just for entertainment value, which they do have, but they teach us our moral and ethical values. There is knowledge about medicinal plants. There is stories about how to take care of our nature so that there's a balance between human and nature. Indigenous communities, wherever they lived, they maintain much better biodiversity. And we heard in this conference that more than 80% of the world's biodiversity are managed by indigenous people. There is a deep respect for nature, and that's why I have heard in many parts of the world, it is the Mother Earth, and then we need to take care of it because our existence, our future generations depends on it. So there is the moral, ethical value part, but also the stories teach perspective taking, like putting yourself in the shoes of others. And then these are important educational tool for children that has been told and retold by grandmothers and grandfathers for many, many generations. And they're highly engaging with students.
Thank you. Kyle?
Yes, to everything you just said very powerfully. I think also it's learning to read is learning to communicate. It is everything, honestly. It's academic success for a child. It's employability as they grow up. It allows them to engage in their communities, to raise and support their families. And it is essential to our economy as a nation. It also is essential to our democracy. To have full, expansive engagement requires a literate population.
Thank you. I'm going to follow up on that question. Sure. My partner is a teacher in Florida, and going back this year was very troubling for a number of reasons because a lot of books, including African American history, a number of other really important stories have been banned in the state of Florida. So just wondering how should we navigate this moment in our country where our stories are in some ways our most important stories are being taken away from our children?
Yeah.
And how do we fix it?
I think I speak on behalf of both of us to say that it's an astounding moment in American history. None of us thought we would be discussing censorship and book bans, for heaven's sakes. I think there's a mistake in our narrative as a country. I think that when we talk about books that represent the full diversity of our country from a racial perspective, a cultural perspective, and every perspective, I think that there is a part of the narrative that these books are something special we're doing for people in those communities, for Black people, for Latino, and that's inaccurate. It's a false narrative. Any child who grows up without full exposure to the broadest array of cultures, no matter what zip code they are, no matter what their cultural background is, if they don't have that full exposure, they're going to be at a disadvantage in the world. And this should be pushing back on book bans, pushing back on censorship is for every child. It's not just for Black and brown children.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if I may add to it, is that even with good intentions, I hear from colleagues and friends say, Mom, you guys are doing a good job, and this is the benefit for your community. And I say this is a myopic view, because the knowledge about medicinal plants, the teaching about moral and ethical values, as well as how to take care of our climate, this is not just benefit to one community. In fact, I would argue this is a benefit for the whole country and to asset to our whole humanity. There is another part, which is that representation matters. So when I was sharing this, one of my colleagues from Namibia said, an African proverb, that until lions have their own historians, the story of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. And with these storybooks, what we are doing is that we are lifting the stories of lions, or say lion-hearted children, so that their stories also, and everyone's story can be heard, and so that everyone can benefit from it. Thank you.
Ah, that's beautiful. I could sit here and talk to you guys about this all day. It's my favorite subject. But I guess just really quickly in our last couple of seconds, is there a story right now that you're really loving that we should check out?
Well, just in the green room, I was looking at my friends' storybooks, and I'm really loving those. They're in 5 languages, including English, so it was fabulous to see those, so bravo.
Amazing.
Yes, so one thing is that when I was growing up, my grandma tells me stories about some plants. It has a magical power. So it does have a medicinal value, but as a kid, we did not want to eat. So my grandma tells this story because this is a horse hoof leaf. The leaf shapes like a horse hoof, and the horse has a magical power to fly. And when I heard that story, I ate more vegetable. So this helps the children to also have respect for that medicinal plants. So there are many, many stories. We'll be happy to share more through our websites and plans. But I think that this is something that we say that one is the story, the other part is storytelling. So the way that indigenous people tell a story, the grandmas, when they tell a story, it is not a fixed thing. They adjust the story based on the children and their age. And they often ask questions. Okay, it's happened. If the prince says this happened, so what she will do? So it creates a lot of interaction. And she tells a story not to her grandchildren only. She tells the story to the children of the entire village. And I have seen some grandmas are more popular than the others.
Well, thank you so much to both of you for being here and sharing your stories. Let's give our...
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Here at CGI, you'll often hear about how people would normally never cross paths, and they get a chance to meet, which leads to incredible new initiatives and partnerships. Our next segment brings 2 such individuals to the stage. Please join me in welcoming Elijah McKinnon and SOPHIA KIANNI.
بلندگو باز دوباره شروع کرد. The megaphone has started again. When I was a kid, my parents' favorite Persian joke was to call me an outspoken megaphone. Especially among my aunts and uncles in Iran, they would always tease the poor soul who was chosen to sit next to me at family dinner, explaining I was about to talk their ear off. Now, there is one exception to this rule. On one of my last trips to Iran, my breath was taken away, and this time not by my grandmother's amazing walnut stew. Instead, when I stepped out at the airport, I looked up and saw a blanket of smog completely covering the sky and burning through my lungs. The more time I spent in Iran, I started to realize that this horrible air quality was actually hospitalizing thousands of people every single day. And not only that, but this air pollution was a symptom of a larger crisis, the climate crisis, and that temperatures in the Middle East were rising more than twice the global average. And I wouldn't be much of a megaphone if I didn't talk about this. So I decided to work with my mom, and we sifted through my 6th grade homework about climate change, and I decided to translate these resources into Farsi so I could give my relatives a speech at my grandmother's next dinner about what was happening to their community. At this family dinner, I stood up and I told my relatives that the burning hot heat waves that they were seeing year after year were actually getting worse because of the burning of fossil fuels. For the first time, my relatives looked at me with fear in their eyes. My translations had succeeded in convincing them that climate change was a real and pressing threat. But as I reflected, I soon realized that this was not just a problem with my family or even with Iran. This was a global issue. Because the statistics surrounding this are alarming. 75% of the world doesn't speak English, but 80% of scientific resources are only available in English. And specifically, when looking at climate change, the UN's IPCC report, widely regarded as the most renowned piece of climate literature in the world, is only officially available in the 6 UN languages. And these languages account for less than half of the world's speaking population. Meaning, the majority of people in the world are being left behind in our advocacy. And even more importantly, that people on the front lines, like my relatives, marginalized communities that are being worse impacted by the climate crisis, don't have access to the resources they need. They don't have the science to actually advocate for their communities and speak up about these injustices. And they're also ill-equipped to deal with the climate disasters that are impacting their communities. Now, that's when it hit me. This was not an issue of resources. This was not an issue of knowledge. This was an issue of accessibility. So when I was 17, I decided to start Climate Cardinals with the goal that one day, everyone, everywhere, would know about climate change and they would care enough to take action. In the early days, I recruited from my childhood bedroom in McLean, Virginia, all of my friends, and I baited them with community service hours to do translations for me into the different languages that they and their relatives speak. We would swap around words like ingredients, adding a dash of namak and felfel, salt and pepper, to our English conversations. Now, just a few years later, using the power of social media, we have been able to mobilize millions of words of climate translation through a network of 10,000 student volunteers across 80 countries, and we've done translations into over 100 different languages. And this story to me really illustrates the power of language and culture to connect a diverse group of young people with one common thread, which was this passion for climate action and a love and care for our planet. Now we've even partnered with Google, with their AI and machine learning translation team to automate and streamline much of our translation processes. And our work has spread across the globe, especially helping those in the global south to access these resources. And our core team now spans all the way from Johannesburg to India, and even my right-hand man, Hikaru, who I've corresponded with for the last 4 years, who has helped me through every partnership I've never had the pleasure of meeting in person. Our efforts have really borne fruit, and we're now helping everyone from the UN to the Yale Center for Climate Communications do translations, and we're aiming to translate at least 1.5 million words of resources every single year across 40 different projects. What we've started is not just a nonprofit, it truly is a movement. And the biggest thing that my journey has taught me is that when it comes to climate change, language should not be a barrier to entry. Everyone should be empowered to become a climate advocate and to talk about climate justice. My team and I now swap around words and sentences like puzzle pieces until, aha. With the addition of a final comma, our concern for the planet is successfully distilled into ink. Thank you.
Hello, beautiful people of the world. So happy to be here with you. I am Elijah McKinnon, and I use they, them pronouns. I'm going to invite us today to get into our bodies. So if you would like to just join me, and if you are able to, feel free to raise your hands to any of the prompts that align with you. Raise your hand if you have watched or consumed a piece of media that has made you laugh. Okay, good. Let's see. Raise your hand if you have watched or consumed a piece of media that's made you cry. Okay, keep that hand up. I like this game. I like it a lot. Let's see if you have watched or consumed a piece of media that has taught you something about yourself or the world around you. Okay, seems like everyone sees how important media is in your life. Feel free to lower your hands. I'm so happy that we are arriving here in the same space. So for me, I was raised by a dynamic Black woman. She was tender, yet powerful, jovial, but diligent, and she really was the blueprint for the executive diva that stands here before you, right? Yeah. As a partnerless parent for a very inquisitive preteen, she taught me so much about the world. She used film and TV and the arts to build a bridge to so many faraway lands. More than a source of just passive entertainment, she taught me and exposed me to new ways of being through art and film and television. After a long day of work, we would gather after dinner in our lounge, and she would simply say to me, "Could you pass me the remote?" One day, my mom retired to her room, and I decided to stay in our lounge and engage in some not so child-friendly exploration. I was in a place in my life where I was trying to learn who I was becoming, as well as understanding the language that felt so far away from me. With my channel recall button in hand, I discovered Queer as Folk. Now, I'm not sure if you're familiar with that particular program, but it is a bit more of an audacious LGBTQ+ representation than the commonly found Will and Grace and Queer Eye for the Straight Guy that plagued my screen at the time. I was exposed by her. She caught me. And from that moment, it was so terrifying because there was a part of me that knew who I was becoming but didn't have the language. And what she did was create a bridge. What could have been incredibly shaming was an opportunity for me to get closer to a language that felt so foreign. I never got the chance to come out to my mother as queer or non-binary, but today I stand before you incredibly proud at the way in which she was able to navigate and build the bridge for me. She opened up portals and opportunities for me to see myself in new ways. In particular, she would somehow engage in all of the programs that we were, used to watching, but also bring in Tongues Untied by Marlon Riggs, or a screening of Watermelon Woman by Cheryl Donier. And that allowed me to see myself represented in a different way. It allowed me to see that I was not like the characters being depicted and portrayed in mainstream media. Like my mom, I now hold the immense responsibility of being able to support and amplify artists, media makers from around the globe, specifically those who are actively looking for ways to get closer to their identities, as well as build bridges to new ones. Through the work that I get to do at Open Television, which is an Emmy-nominated nonprofit platform dedicated to intersectional storytelling, I'm so thrilled that I get to have an opportunity and a platform and a huge responsibility to build this bridge. OTV is laying brick by brick the necessary foundation to undo decades of inequality, specifically in the mainstream media. We are empowering a generation of storytellers who are unafraid to build these necessary bridges, but also unafraid to embrace the nuances and cultural differences. They are deeply empowered by navigating complex systems that make sure that their stories are told authentically in mainstream media. For far too long, the media landscape has been dominated by a lack of nuance, a lack of diversity, and specifically a lack of intersectional storytelling. At OTV, I get the chance every day, one, to help the media repair itself, and two, imagine a whole new world that celebrates the nuance that is found in intersectional identities that have been marginalized by not only market, but society because of their race, their gender, their sexuality, their disability, or their citizenship status. The stories that we tell ourselves and each other hold critical narrative power. And they help us dismantle division. So, as I close today, I'd like to invite a beautiful summoning into this space in the spirit of my mother and ask you, could you pass me the remote? Thank you.
That was truly amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I'm going to start out with asking about language. You both talk a lot about the importance of the diversity of language in many different ways. And I just wanted to see, do you have examples of how diversity of language in your own life and work has kind of unlocked important solutions or epiphanies or new kinds of narratives? I would love to hear more about that. Elijah, I'll start with you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. And also, I just want to say I'm so happy that we both bring in the matriarchy into both of our stories. So thank you for that. When I think about language every day, yeah, I have the privilege and honor of running a all-Black, queer-led team. And as purveyors of intersectional content, we're constantly learning about various different identities and experiences. And I think what's actually really beautiful about the work that we get to do in terms of a primary example is that we are not the keepers of this knowledge, right? So we are every day learning about individuals and the ways in which they are arriving in this world. But it's also quite challenging, right? Because the language is changing, and we are also changing with it. And so it is a deep honor and invitation for us to get a little bit closer each day to understanding how we play a role in allowing people to show up bravely who they are.
Thank you. Sophia?
I'll start with a story that I often think about, which is when I was younger, I grew up bilingual. My mom would always speak to me in Farsi, and my dad would speak to me in English. But at one point, my Farsi was better than my English. And I remember because I was in school, and I had wanted to ask my friend for a hair tie, and I didn't know what the word was in English. And I was like, a kesh, and she didn't know what I was saying. And I went home, and I thought it was so funny, and I told my parents. And they were so scared, because they told me, well, we moved to the United States so that you could have an incredible future and an incredible education, and that means you have to know how to speak English. And so for a few years, I stopped speaking Farsi, or at least we spoke much less Farsi in our home, and my English became much better. But I always think back to those days, and it really breaks my heart, because me knowing Farsi is the only reason I was actually able to start Climate Cardinals, and I'm so glad that my aunts very stubbornly started speaking Farsi with me again, because they were adamant that I would carry on and continue our culture through language. And I love to think about that story, because without the persistence of my family to ensure that I remained rooted in my culture and my narrative and my story, then I wouldn't have been up here sharing with all of you the emergence of Climate Cardinals.
Thank you. I'm gonna ask a similar question as I did earlier, but there's so many different ways of approaching these really critical areas, and we've seen a lot of brilliant people across expertise here at CGI. Why did you feel called to stories and language as kind of the one that you really felt like you needed more love and investment?
I'll start. Well, kind of like what I was saying in my story, growing up, it was always a joke in my family that I was really outspoken and loud, and I would go on tangents and get really, really passionate about things. And because of that, my aunt would always tell me, you have to find something to do for your career that involves being able to speak and storytell. And I never knew what that would mean. I never knew what that could look like, until when I was 19, I very much on a whim decided to apply to TED Talks Global Idea Competition with this big idea that if we wanted to tackle climate change, we had to be rooted in climate education, and more specifically, we had to be rooted in climate translation. And so I ended up somehow, against the odds, winning the contest, and I gave my debut TED Talk when I was 19, really about the power of storytelling and translation when it came to mobilizing people on climate. And that, for me, opened the doors to so many incredible opportunities that I've been fortunate to have. I mean, I'm 21, I'm still pretty young. But it just opened the doors to so many opportunities that have really allowed me to relish the role and the title of being a storyteller, and to hopefully inspire and mobilize many more people to get involved in the fight for climate change.
Thank you. As someone who is also a climate storyteller and passionate about climate communications. Do you know?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, as the executive director and a co-founder of a media and storytelling platform, I think that I love what the power of storytelling has in these types of spaces. I think there is a softness that allows us to arrive in a way that feels really tender and poignant. And I think that a lot of these big concepts and a lot of these really, really difficult, nuanced challenges are able to be, I don't think, broken down here in the story format, but I think that they're handled with so much grace. And so when my lovely friends over at the Elevate Prize Foundation reached out around this opportunity, I think, and they know I ask a lot of questions. I'm a very inquisitive person. I just would like to know how I'm arriving, and so I can arrive with the most intent. But I think what stuck out to me was how these types of spaces have been specifically designed to build bridges between larger conversations that are happening throughout this space. And so I'm really, really happy that we're landing here today with such a nuanced approach to exploring what language means in all of our work, and how so much of that is unique to the individual sharing the story.
Yeah. Jumping off of that, I came up in the climate movement, and we, full of absolutely brilliant people that I've been honored to work with, but we have just historically not invested much into storytelling as a movement, and I think that's true for most progressive issue areas. So what would be sort of your call to action around storytelling, and why all of us should be taking it much more seriously and investing more in it?
Oh, I love that question. It's what I tell all of my artists that I work with. It's what I tell anyone that is navigating and oscillating within my orbit is bravery. Oh my goodness, like, and not just being courageous, right? Not just being fierce, but getting really, really close to what it feels like to be brave in your truth and in your authenticity, so that when you're sharing and you're communicating your stories, they don't feel far away from you, right? They are of you. And what I love about storytelling and what I love about the power of storytelling, as I shared with the journey that my mother brought me on, was that there's such a beautiful experience and exchange that happens when you are in a place of owning your story and building power within it to be able to gift it to someone, right? And then as the individual who's receiving it, you get all of this opportunity to immerse yourself in an experience that you would have never been able to have, because no one can tell that story the way that you can.
Sophia,
I completely agree with you, especially on the topic of bravery. Of course, coming from an immigrant family, I think the most stereotypical thing my parents always advocated was that I should pursue a STEM career and I should study something very sensible like computer science. And when I told them I was much more interested in policy and history and climate science, they were a little skeptical, which I understood, of course, because you don't move to America willy-nilly to become a storyteller without a concrete career plan. But being able to authentically follow what has become my passion has led me into rooms and through experiences I never in a million years could have imagined, and that my parents also in a million years never could have imagined. And especially in a world with AI, with ChatGPT, the most precious commodity, in my opinion, is going to be creativity. And the people who are able to take what is plain hard science or very formal written English and turn it into something compelling and beautiful and stories that capture the world. And the last thing I'll say is I often return to the example of when that video was circulating throughout social media of that sea turtle that had a plastic straw in its nose. And it was that singular video that caused dozens of cities across the world to ban plastic straws, dozens of private corporations, and that's a story. Videos, social media, photos, this is all a vehicle for storytelling, and that's how we spark mass movements and mass change, when people are truly inspired by others.
Amen. Well, thank you so much. I can't wait to hear many more of your stories, and I'm just really appreciative. Let's give them a round of applause, Elijah and Sophia. For our final segment of not just this session, but all of the Story Studio for this year here at CGI, we're going to focus on a very important topic, the refugee crisis. Throughout this meeting, we have heard about these issues across different sessions. However, the importance of this issue cannot be emphasized enough. Our next two speakers not only share incredible personal stories, they challenge us to find ways that we can create commitments to end this devastating crisis and see the hope in what the future can hold. Please welcome to the stage Dr. Maria Albide and ATIF JAVED.
I still remember this cold morning in 2015 when, in my exile in Paris, France, I wake up to the ding of a WhatsApp message saying, please don't close the center. I was still waking up. I answered quickly, who are you and what center are you referring to? She said, or she wrote, I'm a student learning English in your center in Ghouta, and I'm getting familiar with the language, and I heard you are planning to close the center. Please don't. It is my only way to continue learning. I was cut off my university because of the siege. The center she was referring to was one of our women safe spaces that we established in the most dangerous and precarious areas of Syria. Under the ongoing war, their spaces were designed to offer safe space, but also different kind of services women will ask for, going from psychosocial support to English courses or whatever. The center were the core of our organization and still are the core of our organization, Women Now for Development. They were political, and they still are, political space for women to meet, to communicate, to exchange in a time of war when there is no space for women at all levels. Reading her message made me feel humbled and deeply sad. Humbled because this woman was still, or dared to big dream in a condition of war, of siege. She was sending me a message of an area called Ghouta in Syria that was under bombardment and siege, where there was no electricity, barely water. Food and medicine were cut. People were living underground to protect themselves from bombardment, and families were forced to boil grace to feed their children because of a siege imposed by their own government. And yet, she dared to continue her learning, and yet we had to close the center because of the increasing risk for the life of our team there. I felt deeply sad because despite everything that she was going through, her main concern was to continue learning English. Learning a foreign language, especially English, is one of the main requests we received in our centers. Some women want to support their children's education, others want to continue their educations, others want access to internet, but the main reason.
Right, so we don't know each other, but I'd like to get to know you all a little bit. But I'd like to do it by taking you with me to a refugee camp so we can get to know each other the way that refugees do. So how many people have been to a refugee camp before? Raise your hand. Not too many. So this room is about 100-person capacity. Did you know that this is the rough population density of a refugee camp? That's not seating capacity, that's to live in this space. In fact, we're like double subscribed for our capacity. The person to your left will be here for 17 years. The person to your right doesn't even speak the same language as you. And in fact, in our camp, there are 25 different language communities. Through that door, an American medic comes for an hour once every 6 months. A Greek attorney comes once every 12 months. And a French trauma counselor comes once every 2 years to help all of you. Now, if we're lucky, we might have one person in our camp who speaks either English, French, or Greek and can translate for everyone else here. How many people have a relative that's a refugee? Raise your hand. Not too many. Well, my hand's raised because my grandmother was a refugee, and she depended on me for years to interpret for her. You know, we moved to the United States the week after 9/11, and so that fear of brown-skinned Muslim immigrants was rough. But I was a little luckier than her. She used to tell me, people can only judge me based on what they see. At least they get to hear you out, ATIF. And so I think about her, and I think about the 36 million refugees, half of whom face language barriers, struggling to resettle, signing their kids up for school, applying for jobs, applying for asylum, fleeing climate disaster, Syrians, Afghans, Rohingya, Uyghurs, Guatemalans, Ukrainians, Sudanese, more and more. And so my last question to you all is, how many people here are bilingual? Raise your hand. A few more people. That's how I realized we could solve this language problem. And so my best friend and I are engineers, and we said, what if every bilingual in the world could volunteer as a micro-volunteer translator for refugees and immigrants right from their phone? And so in 2018, we launched Tarjimly, which means translate for me, a nonprofit with the mission of eliminating humanitarian language barriers and being the world's most accessible translator and interpreter service. Now, we do this through a growing army of 50,000 volunteer translators and an AI-enhanced mobile app. So I know what you're thinking, okay, volunteers, all right, is that gonna work? Can anyone guess here how many volunteers run all of Wikipedia today? Just shout out an idea. How many do you think? A million? How many volunteers? 115,000 volunteers manage the world's entire information store today. Just 115,000. So the translator and volunteer supply is there. We just made a way to train and enhance the effectiveness of deploying that community. And so what we've done with AI in the last 5 years is match people to the right translator at the right time for the right situation in 90 seconds. And where we're going with AI translation in the future is connecting AI translation with human translators. So we can actually create a feedback loop that builds the language data sets that are needed for machine translation to finally actually be reliable and useful in these under-resourced languages. And this is one of the critical layers and missing ingredients in reducing the digital divide. So the technology is cool, probably getting cooler over the years, but for me, it's the stories of these people that really gets me. A Tarjimly translator was there for a Syrian father who needed to tell the doctor his son was allergic to penicillin. A Tarjimly translator was there for a Congolese woman who waited months for her asylum interview, only to find out the day of her interpreter was unavailable. And a Tarjimly translator was there for a Guatemalan asylum seeker in a detention center who needed to tell their story to the attorney filing their case. And there are 96,000 stories just like this on Tarjimly. And so what I've learned in this work is that our sector needs to do a lot more in focusing on these foundational infrastructure issues that prop up other verticals in the humanitarian sector. Language is about a lot more than just being able to communicate with people. It actually improves the efficiency and accessibility of every single other sector and social service. And so in fact, with your language skills, you can turn barriers into bridges and empower millions of people, just like my grandmother, to have a voice and be heard. Thank you.
Thank you so much for all of your work. This is obviously, there's so much intersection between the refugee crisis and climate change, so I'm just so appreciative and really honored to be hearing your stories and just be sitting with you here today. So on the topic, I'm wondering what are some of the stories related to the refugee crisis that you would like to see more of? You know, let's say you owned a production company and could make a movie or a TV show. What are the ones that you would like more people to see? And also, what are some of the stories that we do hear that are harmful or problematic and that we need to try to not be telling as much?
I think, actually, we need to, what I would like is really to see these people as normal people. Mm-hmm. They are victims of war, but not to, like, make them, like, we tend to picture them as victims that have no power. Mm-hmm. And I think my main message will be that these people have power and have agency, and I have seen a lot of amazing women leading change in their camps or doing amazing work. So yeah, I think let them picture as a human being that what happened to them could happen to any of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great.
What I'd like to see more is people understanding some of the psychological impacts of loneliness, isolation. Just like imagine being in a place where nobody understood you, nobody could help you. Like it's that emotional and psychological impact that refugees go through, I think is one of the most difficult and harshest things that they have to face along their journey. And so giving them some sort of support in that could be really powerful. I think the second thing to your second question, which is like, what are we getting wrong? we're getting language wrong. Like you actually just said something very interesting, which is like the intersection of refugees and the climate crisis, right? Are people who flee their country because of climate disaster refugees? Is that part of the nomenclature that we're using currently? No, right? Are migrants the same thing as refugee? When is someone a migrant versus when is they a refugee? What is an immigrant? All of this nomenclature. In fact, most people I talk to about refugees, they don't even know the umbrella of like displaced people, internally displaced people, refugees, asylum seekers, Palestinian refugees. Like there's a bunch of nuance in language that people miss. And that's, I think, something that should really be discussed more, especially the climate refugee thing, which isn't even recognized today as a problem. It's like, it's not part of it.
Yeah, it's such, I mean, I would say it's one of the biggest problems when it comes to climate change, and it isn't talked about it enough at all. I would love to actually follow up with you afterwards more on that. But I'm actually, Daniel Kwan, who's an incredible filmmaker who spoke on the narrative change panel just before, had a quote at an event we went to recently that systems are just fossilized stories, which I just think really captures it. So I'm curious how you've seen your work kind of subvert, harmful systems and that are allowing this horrible crisis to, to continue to become worse and worse.
I think maybe Dr. Maria's.
Yeah, I will leave it to you.
Well, I'll share one, which I think is one of the things I've noticed, at least in our space, is that there's a misalignment of like when we provide services to people. One of the things we're doing with Tarjimly is trying to be like in the hands of refugees themselves, in the spaces that need to be on demand, If some crisis occurs or there's a conflict, we have humanitarian sector kind of deploy themselves and everything is driven top down through these large NGOs and large sectors that is kind of, managed this way. I believe very strongly in the power of creating that agency and control, not just, for the humanitarians individually who do the on-the-ground work, but also the refugees themselves who can pick up the phone and say, hey, I can get a translator to understand what's going on and get access to information. So for me, that's one of the things that we're trying to challenge, which is being less top-down and being much more bottoms-up about who and how we help people.
That's awesome. Do you have anything you would like to add to that one?
No, I think what ATIF is saying is very much on our DNA, on our organization, is when you use all the term of empowerment, or I think we place ourselves beyond the people, while I think empowerment is giving people tools and then letting them decide what they want to do with their own tools. And we have seen this very much in refugee camps. We have seen women organizing themselves against child marriage and doing amazing work that none of international organizations have been able to do because they don't speak the language, they don't know the context. They are stranger to the people. While when we give the people themselves and the women the tools, they can do amazing things.
And just kind of jumping off of really this whole conversation, what are some of the most commonly misunderstood parts of your work? I think what you just spoke to as far as the language itself was very illuminating. That you would just like to be, talked about on a wider scale.
Yeah, I think Dr. Abede actually has made me think a lot about context and culture in the work that we do. And, in the last 1 or 2 years, we had the perspective that, hey, we can kind of solve all these problems with volunteers and that's the right way to go. Now we're actually have a program called Tarjimly Talent where we hire refugees for translating for rare languages. If you don't have enough volunteers or the skill level of volunteers is enough, you actually enable and empower the communities who are part of these ecosystems to say, great, now I can work for the Red Cross, the IRC, the World Relief, all these different chapters, but I can do it in a way that actually helps my own people, and I have cultural nuance and context. And even in the way we build the app, like you can filter for a female translator, you can filter for someone who's got experience in the medical setting, you can filter for a particular dialect within your country of this particular language and not just kind of be like, all Spanish is Spanish. Like, that's not the case, right? So I think we've learned a lot in just culture and nuance that like, I think Dr. Abede actually was really like a strong advocate for it too.
Thank you, Atif, for mentioning our conversation. Yeah, actually, I think there is, when we also, again, spoke about empowering refugees or local community, or we always think on short term, while we know that the crisis is long term. There is not a refugee crisis that has been solved like under 10 years. And still our programs are very short term, and when if you invest in them, like really learning a language, you will they will change their whole life. But we are still stuck on knitting and this kind of, while they, we invest as organization, for example, on, you mentioned the psychosocial support. We invested in some of refugees who are our colleague also to continue their university to become psychosocial specialists. And it's something that we don't think about it when we said that people can serve themselves, they just need the tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My last question is, you both of your organizations track metrics, and kind of impact in research. And I'm wondering if through looking at different metrics and measurements, if certain solutions have surprised you, if things, maybe that you weren't anticipating jumped out.
I think I already mentioned, I can mention another example, but yeah, the group of women that we supported leading the campaign against child marriage, they were able to stop more than 500 marriage for children in 3 years. That's a number that I never heard at an international level, never, ever. Yeah, another group of women we have been supporting through long years who are advocating for searching of the missing and detainees of war in Syria. They have been able to make the UN vote a resolution. So, we listened to their story at the beginning in 2014, and we thought like, oh my God, these women are so powerful in telling their story. So what they need to be able to tell their story at international level. So we supported them in all the tools, psychosocial support, some leadership programs, some storytelling with other organizations in our organization. And then here we are. Like every few months, there is one of them at the General Assembly, at the UN, telling their story, advocating for their own beliefs and their own needs, and they got the resolution.
Oh, God, that's an amazing story. Thank you. Do you want to add anything?
I'll just add one thing. I think the invisibility of the problem that we're tackling is really, really hard. And I was surprised so much early on that there's just like no data, no research that's like out there that actually understands where language barriers are a problem on the ground. Because the reality is, like, if I'm an organization that's doing work in a refugee camp, I just don't track or know how many people are coming in the door that I can't serve. And so we have about like 30,000, active users on our platform, and we were able to survey and track and figure out like how many people are actually coming in the door that you cannot serve without this language access. And the number was like 50%. So like half of the people they can't even serve because of inefficient language access. And that for me was really surprising because it speaks to the invisibility of some of these problems when we just don't have metrics and data on them. Like we just don't know these things. And so I keep thinking about what are the other things we don't really know about these problems and about these systems. So yeah, that's what stands out to me.
Well, thank you so much for y'all's incredible work and for being here today and sharing your stories and wisdom with us. I'm honored, and that's all the time we have. So let's give them a round of applause. And you guys can go that way. Thank you again for being here and for CGI for prioritizing story throughout this year's event. I started Good Energy because stories are vital to finding courage to face the climate crisis. But I also started it for a much more personal reason. I've worked on climate my entire adult life. I've struggled at times with anxiety and heartbreak and fear. I also live on the Gulf Coast of Alabama, so I experience the impacts often and firsthand. And the truth is that I need these stories. I need help making meaning of all of this and finding joy and beauty in the midst of it. And so do many millions of others. So I'm no longer an evangelical, but I still pray. In Hadwana, patron saint of stories, please give us the stories we need to save ourselves. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining this session. Please make your way to the afternoon main stage session. Thank you for joining this session. Please make your way to the afternoon main stage session.